The Minchas Asher has a piece for this week's parsha, and I'm going to try to present it and read parts of it inside. I don't know if you are able to print it out from the email. Thank you to David, or maybe you're able to listen Bal Peh. And as I go along, I see that there are a lot of problems in the text itself. So I'm not sure exactly whether or not this Sefer Minchas Asher, even if you could get a hold of it there in Canada, but I don't even know if we're going to go with it. We'll try today as a test case, and we'll see weiter, as we go along. The issue that he addresses here was fascinating in my mind. Very often, I get invited to a wedding, and the truth is that sometimes, to attend a wedding, not always the case, but sometimes it entails giving up hours and hours of time, whether it's the travel back and forth and the wedding itself. And you wonder, if I could be continuing with my learning, whether or not I should give up my Torah learning for the sake of the mitzvah of Hachnasas Kala, of Simchas Chosim Kala. In the case of Avraham Avinu, we have a conflict in terms of Hachnasas Orchim. And the issue for Avraham Avinu is that he's involved in what we call Kabbalas Pnei Shechina, because the Shechina came to give him a visit on the third day of his Milah. And on the other hand, he sees the Orchim going by. So we have, this is a classic case of a conflict, what they call situational ethics. We have to decide between two great things, and which takes priority. So that's called the din of kedima. Now, in the sugya itself, which is in Masechtas Shabbos, and the Gemara talks about the Hachnasas Orchim of Avram and Sarah, the Gemara uses two different lashonos. One lashon is that Gedola Hachnasas Orchim kikabolas pnei Shechina, which sounds like the Gemara at that point is equating the two. That Kabbalas Pnei Shechina, we'll see if that really reflects on the status of Talmud Torah, but the Hachnasas Orchim is up there on the top. But there's another statement in the Gemara that seems to indicate that Hachnasas Orchim is even greater. Like, for example, the Gemara talks about Ashkamas Beis HaMedrash, where you get up to learn in the Beis Medrash, and the Gemara says Hachnasas Orchim is even greater than Ashkamas Beis HaMedrash. Now, the bottom line of this whole issue is what we call Efshar L'kaimo al Yidei Acherim. Is it possible that mitzvah that comes by and vies for your Talmud Torah, that mitzvah could be fulfilled without you personally attending to the mitzvah, which means that you could have someone else achieve the same goal? Now, again, you have to decide when you say achieve the same goal, nothing as great as when one does the mitzvah himself rather than pass it on to someone else. But nevertheless, within reason, in a scale of, let's say 1 to 10, let's say you could do it at the level of 8, and somebody else could do it at the level of 7, but it's reasonably similar. But if on the other hand, there's no one else to do it, and you're the only one available, then the halacha is that we drop Talmud Torah for the sake of Hachnasas Orchim. And the Minchas Asher is vacillating back and forth on the following issue. Is this because of the greatness of Hachnasas Orchim, putting it up on a special level? Or is it simply a reflection of the fact that since you could do the mitzvah through someone else, and it's Efshar L'kaimo al Yidei Acher, therefore, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah will now outweigh any other mitzvah. So as great as that other mitzvah might be, it cannot trump the mitzvah of Talmud Torah because of the greatness of Talmud Torah if all things are equal and it's efshal l'kaim al yidei acher. So you might ask, even if it's efshal yidei acher, but it still is a mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim, no one's going to deny that if Ruvain, who's studying Torah, will close his Gemara and now receive Shimon as a guest, that Ruvain certainly fulfills the great mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim. And that would apply even if he could have sent Levi to be Machnas Shimon as an Orech. But nevertheless, he would get the mitzvah himself, that's Ruvain, even if he stopped his learning. So that if that be the case, then even in a case where Levi could step in and stand in the shoes of Ruvain, and therefore the mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim could be achieved without Ruvain ceasing his learning, but nevertheless, we might say that Hachnasas Orchim is such a great mitzvah that even in the case where it's efshal l'kaim al yidei acherim, nevertheless, Hachnasas Orchim should take precedence and give it priority because of the greatness of its level. As if to say that Gedol Hachnasas Orchim is even greater, it supersedes the greatness of Talmud Torah. So that even though the Gemara tells us that Talmud Torah is Keneged Kulam, but that is still not as great as Gedol Hachnasas Orchim Yoser mi Kabbalah mi Hashkamas Beis HaMedrash, and therefore the din of Hachnasas Orchim and its high level status might generate halacha that even in a case where efshal l'kaim al yidei acherim, it would still topple over the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And although the Minchas Asher raises such a possibility, it crosses his mind, he rejects it outright. And if you take a look again at the first paragraph, you'll see he says that although the Gemara says how great is the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, but nevertheless, you have on the other side of the scale that great mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim. And the Gemara on the bottom line says that if it's efshar al yidei acherim, then you continue your learning. And we seem to apply that even to the case of Hachnasas Orchim. But yet he raises the following possibility. He says, Efshar, again, you'll see how he rejects this, the Hachnasas Orchim shiny, that although the general rule is that if I can send someone else to do the mitzvah, I continue my learning, but not so in the case of Hachnasas Orchim, which is different. Sheishkula hashkamas beis hamidrash. It's equal to getting up for learning, and that's Rabbi Yochanan. And according to Rav Dimi, it's Gedol Hachnasas Orchim yoser me'ashkamas beis hamidrash. So in paragraph number 1, just to summarize, we put all the emphasis on the greatness and the weight that we attribute to the mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim to such an extent, my nafkamina, that Hachnasas Orchim will trump the mitzvah of Talmud Torah even if it's efshal l'kaim al yidei acherim. And that's based on the Gemara in Moed Katan that rates Hachnasas Orchim all the way up on top. And according to Rav Dimi Minardah, even greater than Talmud Torah. But in the next paragraph, the rabbi removes what he said. He rescinds his original position, and he goes back to saying that Hachnasas Orchim should be treated like any other mitzvah, and Talmud Torah therefore trumps any mitzvah as long as it's efshal l'kaim al yidei acherim. And therefore, Klal Gadol v'Gomer hu dili olam ein Talmud Torah nidchem, and they call mitzvah. No matter what mitzvah you have, and you want to give it 3 checks, and you want to put it up on the top of the list, it's a great, fantastic mitzvah. Nevertheless, Talmud Torah always trumps another mitzvah, im efshal asos al yidei acherim. V'gam hachnasas orchim b'chlal. So a person should not be mavatal his Torah as long as there are others who can do it. Like, for example, I told you, I get an invitation in the mail to a wedding. So what would be terrible if I don't attend the wedding? You know, there are 300 people going to the wedding. Maybe there are twice that amount. There'll be plenty of people at the wedding. Why should I be mevatel my Torah if it's efshel l'kayim al yidei acherim? So somebody once told me that if you get a personal invitation, it means that their simcha will be either increased if you show up or decreased if you fail to show up. And therefore, it's efshel l'kayim al yidei acherim. Even though there are another 299 people at the wedding, but nevertheless, you would enhance the wedding in a way that is very unique, that cannot be done without you. But today, you know, they have lists and they invite just about everyone. I wanted to point out this is interesting on the side. In the seminaries here in Eretz Yisrael, and I don't know if they have the same thing across the world, the girl who's making a wedding, the Kala, will put her own letter together with the invitation that's personalized for the person to whom that invitation is being sent. Very hard to refuse to show up to such a wedding. So imagine if you got invited to a wedding of a close relative, a wedding of a Talmud of yours, a wedding of your Rebbe is making, whatever it might be, and there's a close relationship, then you want to take that invitation very seriously and give it a lot of weight. And it might be but as a general rule, what the rabbi is saying here is that it's efshel l'kayim al yidei acherim. There are plenty of people who could do the mitzvah of bikur cholim, of Hachnasas Orchim, of simchas chas v'kala. There are other people around who could do it. And therefore, we go back to the original position that Talmud Torah is greater and trumps any other mitzvah. It topples every other mitzvah. Now, why is it that in a case where it's efshel l'kayim shneim, you can't find someone else to do it for you, then in that case you have to drop your learning. I mean, we just finished saying the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, it's greater and it topples every other mitzvah. Why shouldn't that apply? So the Gemara says, because Gadol Talmud Amevi Lidei Maisa, that the greatness of Talmud Torah is because it facilitates your ability to fulfill all the mitzvahs. If you don't know the Torah, ein amaretz chassid, you can't fulfill the mitzvahs. So therefore, Talmud Torah is there to facilitate the mitzvahs. Now, if you don't stop your learning for the sake of the mitzvah, then basically you're making a statement that Talmud Torah exists independently as an end unto itself, and therefore I'm not going to be bothered by any mitzvah. But if the greatness of Talmud Torah is because it leads to a mitzvah, then obviously you want to stop what you're learning for the sake of a mitzvah. Otherwise, you're making a statement that, I don't see the greatness of Talmud as a facilitator, as a conduit to do the mitzvahs. But in a case of efshel l'kayim al yidei acher, where someone else could do it for you, then why should you stop your learning if someone else could do it for you? So again, let's just summarize 2 points. Point number 1 is that the Minchas Asher raises the possibility, apparently it crosses his mind, that the mitzvah Hachnasas Orchim is so unique and so great on the Richter scale of mitzvahs that it would topple the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, even in the case of efshel l'kayim shneim. However, in paragraph number 2, he rescinds his original position, and he says, you know what? Hachnasas Orchim is a great mitzvah, but the rule is that Talmud Torah is the greatest of all mitzvahs, and it overrides any other mitzvah as long as it's efshel l'kayim al yidei shneim. Then in the 3rd paragraph, he says the following. There's a very strange Gemara in Megillah. It's about Mordechai after the whole Yeshua of Purim. And the Gemara makes a statement that Gedola Talmud Torah Yoser me'atzolas nefashos. And here, my friends, we have to understand, what does the word Yoser mean? And we'll offer 2 interpretations of the word Yoser. So again, the Gemara says that Gedola, the greatness of Talmud Torah, is Yoser. It's even greater than Atzolas Nefashos, than saving lives. Now, the simple pshat, but it's a little bit too simple, it's almost superficial, is that the word yoser means lidchos, that on the scale of kedima, Talmud Torah takes precedence over hatzolos nefashos. And that interpretation of the word yoser is impossible, untenable. It has to be rejected outright, and don't let anyone fool you. That's it, period. Obviously, if there's someone drowning and you're learning Torah, you don't just take the sefer and go like this, if you could jump in and save him, but rather you save a life. And that's for sure true. So what does the word yoser mean when you say that Gedola Talmud Torah yoser mi hatzolos nefashos? So the Taz in Yoredea, where we deal with the Shulchan Aruch's psak as far as the mitzvah of Talmud Torah and the mitzvah of hatzolos nefashos, the Taz points out that the word yoser here means not yoser litchos, not that Talmud Torah is superior and supersedes the mitzvah of hatzolos nefashos and is docha hatzolos nefashos, but rather the word yoser means you have a greater zchus, meaning there are two different realms of halacha and they should not be confused. One realm of halacha is called dinei kedima. There are rigorous rules that the halacha operates with, formulates, and dictates with regard to kedima, which mitzvah comes first. But don't make the mistake that because mitzvah A will prioritize it above mitzvah B, that therefore mitzvah A is inherently a greater mitzvah. So that you can have a mitzvah that we push aside for another mitzvah, but that mitzvah that we push aside is even greater than the mitzvah that you're pushing, for which you're pushing it aside, so that in a choice between Talmud Torah and hatzolos nefashos, in Hilchas Dechia and Kedima, the mitzvah of hatzolos nefashos takes Kedima. But if you're asking me which mitzvah inherently is a greater mitzvah, and it gives you a greater, reach to the heavens and, maybe a front seat, in the Olam Haba, it's going to be Talmud Torah. So Gedola Talmud Torah Yoser Me'atzolos Nefashos means that although in Dinei Kedima I have to be Docha Talmud Torah for the sake of Hatzolos Nefashos, but nevertheless Hatzolos Nefashos is inherently not as great of a mitzvah as Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah has the ability to change a person and impact on him in such a way that, what should we say, he's got such zchuyot because of his Talmud Torah. He's got such credits and rewards. And it's inherent in the essence of Talmud Torah. So then, according to the Taz, if you would ask me, who's greater, a person who dedicated his life to Torah study or a person who dedicated his life to save nefashos, the Taz would claim that the person who's dedicated himself to Talmud Torah is even greater than the person who is involved 24/7 in hatzolos nefashos. That itself is gigantic chiddush, but you can't blame the Taz for that because the Gemara in Megillah says that Gedola Talmud Torah yoser mi hatzolos nefashos. But here is where the Minchas Osher steps into the picture. And he says the following. You see that when the Gemara uses the term Gedola Yoser, that X is even Gedola Yoser than Y, it doesn't mean that therefore X is Docha Y. And therefore he claims in the Minchas Osher that when we saw in Chazal, in the Gemara that we started with, in Shabbos, the Gemara says that Gedola Hachnasas Orchim Yoser me'ashkamas beis hamedrash. Yoser does not mean dechia. It doesn't mean that I prioritize and I drop the beis medrash for the sake of Hachnasas Orchim, but rather Hachnasas Orchim fits into the general mixture of all mitzvos. And the rule of thumb of Kedima is that Talmud Torah is doche all mitzvos unless it's the efshal yidei acherim. But if it's efshal yidei acherim, and I can send you to do the Hachnasas Orchim or the Bikur Cholim or the Hachnasas Kala, Chassan Kala, then that's what I'll do. I'll continue my learning. So what does it mean then that that Hachnasas Orchim is Gedola mi Beis HaMedrash? And the answer is it's Gedola just like Hatzolos Nefashos, Just like Talmud Torah is Gedola from Atzolah. The Gedola means the inherent reward that you'll get for doing the mitzvah. And basically, what we're saying is it's very nice to get up early and go to the Beis HaMedrash, but Hachnasas Orchim is even a greater mitzvah and a greater schus. Later on, he backtracks and he says that maybe the Gemara doesn't mean Talmud Torah, the Gemara means Hashkama, like maybe just getting up a little bit earlier than usual or getting up regularly for Torah. But what I'd like to learn with you now, again, I don't know if you're able to access it, it was in the email, is a piece from the Netziv, the great Netziv from Volozhin, in his super commentary on the Torah, which is called Hamek Dovar, here at the very beginning of Parshas Vayera. And the Netziv is bothered by something which occupies the minds of all the commentaries. The word Vayera appears not once but twice. So let's read it. The Parsha opens, Vayera Elav Hashem Pelonei Mamre, Hu Yoshev Pesach Ha'ol Kechom Hayom. So that Vayera is referring to the Almighty. But then, as far as Avram is concerned, the pasuk says, Vayisa Eno Vayar. Shlosha Noshim Nitzav Malav. So again, you see the word Vayar with regard to Avram. And then immediately the Torah repeats the word Vayar. Vayaretz L'Kroso. Why the double language, what we call kfelut, on the word Vayar? And the Netziv asks another question. The Chazal say on the pasuk Vayar that Avram Avinu looked at these three gentlemen and he tried to figure out whether they were chashuvim or, medium and below. Below the chut hasikra, if you know what I mean, the tachton. And Avram Avinu was looking at them from a distance, and he noticed that they walked in a certain way, one respecting the other, that indicated that they were chashuvim. So the Netziv wants to know, why did Avram Avinu put these people to test? Why test them? Why try to analyze and investigate whether they are chashuvim, they're not chashuvim? Does the mitzvah Hachnasas Orchim only apply to chashuvim? So the Netziv offers what I call a breakthrough interpretation in a lumdish way of this parsha. He says the following. Avram Avinu in the first Vayar was analyzing the halacha. He was in a bind. He didn't know whether the mitzvah of Kabbalas Pnei Shechina, which is the mitzvah of Avos Hashem, that he was involved in on that third day after his milah when the Shechina came to visit him, does that mitzvah trump the mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim? Because he understood that Hachnasas Orchim is a great mitzvah. Is it greater than Kabbalas Pnei Shechina? Is it equal to Kabbalas Pnei Shechina? Ella, he understood, which is against Rav Weiss, but the Netziv says that Avram understood that Gedola Hachnasas Orchim Yosef B'nei Shechina means he Gedola Lidchos, that the word Yoser means Lidchos, that we're dealing with the laws of Dechia, of prioritizing two different mitzvahs, both of which are struggling in a tug of war for your attention at the same time. And therefore, kachu ritzona yisparach she'eh mitzvah naseis doche mitzvah zu, that the mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim should therefore override the mitzvah of Kabbalas Pnei Shechina. Achen, however, Avram Avinu hesitated. Why? De'eno ella kishe'i efshal asosa b'yad acherim. If he could fulfill that mitzvah and have someone else tend to the Orchim, then certainly Kabbalas Pnei Shechina should not be upset, should not be terminated. Aval im efshal asosa al yidei acherim, then ein roy litchos avas Hashem. Don't push off the mitzvah of avas Hashem if somebody else could do the job. And therefore, Kabbalas Pnei Shechina in this context is like Talmud Torah. And the same rules that apply to Talmud Torah in terms of Dechia will now be applied to Hachnasas Orchim. And therefore, if Talmud Torah, you have a mitzvah, it's efshal yidei acherim, so let somebody else do the mitzvah. And if you're involved in Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina and somebody else could be Hachnasas Orchim, let them do the Hachnasas Orchim. And now we get to the second Vayar. What's the second Vayar? In the second Vayar, Avram Avinu made a decision after investigating and calculating that this mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim could not be fulfilled through others. He could not just send Yishmael and have Yishmael be Hachnasas Orchim. And why is that? Because he analyzed it, he looked at these three Orchim, and he saw that they're not hedyotos, to use the language of the Netziv. They're not just, common folk, a rank and file citizen, but rather he understood that these were Gedolim. The ein kvodom litzavos l'misharsam lachnisam l'bayis. It would not be the proper honor, respect for these chashuvim to send a mishares, like a serviceman, to go out and be makabel yorchim. So at that point, Vayar, in the second Vayar, Vayaretz l'krosam. Avram Avinu runs to get them. Why? Because he decided that this is a mitzvah Hachnasas Orchim she'i efshal yidei acherim. No one else could do it, and he was only able to make that determination after he looked carefully, scrutinizing the anoshim, and realized that they were anoshim chashuvim, and it would be below that level of dignity if he were to send his mishares, send somebody else to do Hachnasas Orchim. A brilliant insight of the Netziv. And we see clearly that the Netziv is of the opinion that the rules and regulations that govern Talmud Torah versus any other mitzvah will determine Talmud Torah versus Hachnasas Orchim. So as great as Hachnasas Orchim is concerned, it would only be docha Talmud Torah or Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina, in this case of Avram, if it's efshal yidei acherim. Avram Avinu came to the conclusion that it was efshal yidei acherim, and therefore he treated Hachnasas Orchim like you would treat any other mitzvah. Therefore, he felt that you had to be docha Talmud Torah or Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina for the sake of Hachnasas Orchim. Now, getting back to the Minchas Osher, he quotes on the bottom of the page, going on to the next page, a tshuva from the Aderes. The Aderes was a great mind in Yerushalayim approximately a century ago. He was the father-in-law of Rav Kook, if you ever heard of Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of Palestine. And he tells a story. And the story is a personal story which he tells in order to explain why he thought originally X, and then when he rethought it, he felt badly about it, that he should have done Y instead of X. So what we're getting here is a kind of a shakla v'tarya back and forth through the mind of the Aderes, the great Aderes. What happened was, the Aderes had a minog on Friday, before Shabbos, he would read from the Sefer Torah, the Parsha of the week. And the reason he would read the Parsha is twofold. Number one, to be kind of the mitzvah Talmud Torah of Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum, but at the same time, to guarantee that the Sefer Torah had no mistakes in it for that Parsha, so they could read the Sefer Torah. Somebody comes knocking on his door, and it turns out to be one of the Gedolei Harabonim, one of the great rabbis. And this great rabbi wants to have a meeting with the Aderes, who's the Rav of Yerushalayim. So the Aderes says, look, I can't be bothered right now. When I finish to read the Parsha, I'll be more than happy to sit with you. After he finishes the Parsha, it starts bothering him. And the Aderes begins to think that maybe I was absolutely out of place, out of line, by telling this great Rav to wait until I finished my reading of the Parsha. And he starts thinking to himself, after all, the Gemara says that Gadol, Hachnasas Orchim, Yosem Mikabolos Pnei Shechina, Yosem Ashkamas Beis HaMedrash. So very nice that I'm involved in the mitzvah Talmud Torah by reading the parsha in the Sefer Torah. And apparently you get the impression that, when he read the parsha, he would wrap himself up with talis and tefillin. It was like a heilig azach. But nevertheless, Gedola, Hachnasas Orchim, Yoser mi Kabos Pnei Shechina, Yoser mi Talmud Torah, Hashkamas Beis HaMedrash. But in the tshuva, he goes back, retraces his steps, and explains what was he thinking originally when he told this Rav to wait and delay the Hachnasas Orchim. And that's on the left page, which is called Reish Lamed Aleph, on the first major paragraph, Ach. Now, there's a mistake in the print here. It should say Ach mikol makom kasher gomer es hakriya. When he finished the kriya, Bier, he explained ma choisa daito, what was his original thinking process, velo ispano, that he didn't make himself available lekabolas ha'oreah. And he says the following: Tishema lo amru gedola Hachnasas Orchim Yosem Beis HaMedrash Hashkamas Beis HaMedrash el mishum devitzas Talmud Torah ein lo shir ugvul. Wow. The Aderis now has a breakthrough understanding in his Havamina, in which the question of Hachnasas Orchim versus Talmud Torah, in that what we call tug of war, really depends upon Talmud Torah. It's not a din in Hachnasas Orchim, but rather it's a din in Talmud Torah. And he says the following: Talmud Torah could be broken down into two separate categories, like a flow chart. You have Talmud Torah, and you have two categories. There's the regular Talmud Torah, which is Ein Lo Shir Ugvul, 24/7, 7 days a week. There's no point in which you could say that you finished the Talmud Torah. There's another kind of Talmud Torah, which is limited. You have a given to find and how, you have a purpose, a goal, and when you achieve that goal, you have fulfilled the mitzvah Talmud Torah and Yesh Lo Shir Ugvul. Now, if I were to tell you that in one of these two categories, the halacha is drop your Torah study for the sake of a mitzvah, which of the two categories would you think would allow you to drop the mitzvah Talmud Torah?
Obviously the first.
Why the first? Well, I would have said, Joe, the first, for sure you shouldn't drop it. This is a mitzvah that's so great, it's Ein Lo Shir V'Gvul. This is an endless, eternal, infinite mitzvah. You shouldn't drop it. What do you say, Joe?
But then you'll never do something else.
Excellent. Brilliant. Now, I'm sure that, David and Chaim and Bobby would have also, but we don't know where they are exactly, but, their names are on the screen. But in any event, they might have agreed with you, Joe, but let's see what Joe is saying. And this is exactly what the Aderis was thinking. Originally, he was thinking that the reason why, in the case of Talmud Torah, we would drop Talmud Torah for the sake of another mitzvah is because Talmud Torah is endless, non-stop, no interruption. You're on the train and the train keeps riding. When can you say you finished the mitzvah of Talmud Torah? It's endless. So therefore, if we were to apply the principle that Gadol Talmud Torah, Lidchos, that Talmud Torah would be doch any other mitzvah, forget about doing any mitzvahs. You're always constantly involved in Talmud Torah. So in order to make room for another mitzvah, and there are at least 612 other mitzvahs, we say that Talmud Torah has to give way to another mitzvah, if it's Ef Shalakayim. However, the Aderis thought that there is such an entity within the matrix of Talmud Torah, which is a limited Talmud Torah, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the Aderes thought initially that his involvement in Talmud Torah for the sake of going through the parsha inside the Sefer Torah once, going through it a second time, Shnayim Mikra, and guaranteeing that there are no mistakes in the Sefer Torah. That could be accomplished within a certain period of time. And now I'm going to apply the principle that Gadol Talmud Torah, that Talmud Torah will override any other mitzvah. Because it's a limited Talmud Torah, and the svara that Talmud Torah trumps other mitzvahs doesn't apply in this case. Because the whole basis of why Talmud Torah trumps another mitzvah is only because of the infinite nature of Talmud Torah. He says, Mishum kach, because of this infinite nature, yesh levatel limudo, for another mitzvah like Hachnasas Orchim. Ach mikevet shu kara mitoch ha-sefer, he's reading from a Sefer Torah, not just for the general mitzvah of Talmud Torah, but for the specific purpose of trying to figure out whether or not the Sefer Torah is kosher or not. V'kol kriyasa k'dei lahachidas ha-parsha v'livdok es ha-Sefer Torah mikol psul, hare mitzvah zu mugderes umugbeles. Right? It's well defined and it is limited. And therefore, Mishum hachi eino nidches mipnei Hachnasas Orchim ela omrim ha'osek b'mitzvah potum min mitzvah. You're involved in the study of Torah. It's a great mitzvah. Continue to be involved in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah.
But could you not say though that his would be different because this was also considered tzarchei tzibur for the Sefer Torah. I imagine the Sefer Torah they were using was for what they were going to lay on Shabbos as well. So
okay.
It would be different.
But again, keep in mind, Joe, this what we're getting here is in the tshuva of the Aderes. As he's telling
right.
you why I thought originally, and he doesn't mention a word about tzarchei tzibur. He says the reason. Yeah. But I'm saying, you want to rewrite the tshuva, so to speak, and you could say, no, I don't mean that. Don't misunderstand me. I think that's a good idea. Maybe there's another reason why he would not stop. But again, I think the metzius was that possibly he could be machnas the oreach, have a 10-minute discussion with him on whatever's on his mind, and then go back to finish preparing the safe, guaranteeing the safety.
I mean, I'm saying, so if a person would have, like specific chavrusas set up throughout the whole day,
yeah,
each one of them is considered its own particular compartment. Would you say that if somebody comes to ask him about another mitzvah at any time during those things, while each one's its own particular departmental mitzvah, and therefore he doesn't have to break from any of them?
That's what it seems like, yeah. Because if you break down the mitzvah to a beginning and an end, the Talmud Torah starts here and ends here, then you're involved in that mitzvah. Mitzvah patuna mitzvah. I find this a little difficult, this havamina of the Aderes, because the Gemara says, like, for example, mevatlin Talmud Torah lemikra Megillah, right? So the assumption is that he's involved in the regular classic Talmud Torah, and still he has to stop for mikra Megillah. So that even though, so that's what the Aderes is going to say, that since, that mitzvah of Talmud Torah is non-stop, therefore he's got to take a break for another mitzvah, in this case for mikra Megillah, right? Now, what was his maskana? Apparently, the maskana, the final conclusion of the Aderes, was that the halacha of Talmud Torah, and the reason why you either drop Talmud Torah for the sake of a mitzvah or you do not drop it for the sake of mitzvah, rather you continue, has nothing to do with whether or not it's this kind of Talmud Torah that's limitless or that type of Talmud Torah that's limited. It's simply, these are the rules of Talmud Torah. we drop Talmud Torah for the sake of another mitzvah if it's ef shalakayim al yidei acher. And therefore, Maskana, he felt very guilty about the fact that he did not stop his Talmud Torah, even though it was a limited Talmud Torah, because that's the nature of Talmud Torah. Whatever shape or form of Talmud Torah, whatever category it belongs to, the halacha is that if it's ef shal yidei acher, you have to stop for the sake of another mitzvah. And therefore, he should have done so. But then, in the Minchas Osher, he writes...
I have a question.
Yeah.
How come Kriyas Megillah isn't considered Limud Torah?
Ah, excellent. That's a very good question. Apparently, Limud Torah is a function of what we call kamus and echus, meaning it all depends upon the what's the word I want to use? The quality, right? The quality, the echus. In other words, when you have two possibilities of Talmud Torah, then the final determination should be the quality of your Talmud Torah. And the quality of your Talmud Torah is greater than that of Mikra Megillah. Why? Because Mikra Megillah is just a superficial kind of reading. Again, there are certain Gedolim who will hear the reading and they'll understand the depths of the Megillah, but that's not part of the mitzvah. The real mitzvah is just reading the Megillah, hearing the Megillah. And therefore, we're not going to say that let's upgrade the reading of the Megillah to the level of Talmud Torah in relation to what's relative. Oh, that's the word I want. Relative to Talmud Torah be'amkus, in depth with a great quality, Mikra Megillah does not shine a candle, and therefore, if not for the fact that we established that mevatlin Talmud Torah, it would not be considered Talmud Torah. All right, let's just see. We just have, I'm looking at the clock here, just about maybe 5 minutes left because we got to run to open the shul for Mincha. So let's see what we can determine in the next paragraph here in the Minchas Osher. He says, Etzem Hasvara, he says the logic of the Aderes in his original thinking, Yesh Ba Tam Rav, it does have a certain appeal to it, to explain why Talmud Torah should be pushed off, because otherwise it's endless. Just 1 second. Right. Mikol makom, nevertheless, Miloshen HaGemara, Baruch, it's clear that that's not so. It has nothing to do with this nature of Talmud Torah as an endless mitzvah, that therefore we should give kedima to another mitzvah, because otherwise we'll undermine all the mitzvahs. Ella mishum chashivas ha-mitzvah Hachnasas Orchim. Now, I don't understand how this was written up. I told you this is a little bit of a trial, because initially he completely rejected this approach, if you remember. The first paragraph here, he had entertained the possibility that maybe the reason why we would stop Talmud Torah is because of the greatness, the superior nature of Hachnasas Orchim. But he immediately rejected that. He said that Hachnasas Orchim is to be included like any other mitzvah in the same rules and regulations. And if the mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim could be fulfilled by someone else, then continue learning Torah. So I don't understand why here he says, Mishum chashivas mitzvahs Hachnasas Orchim. Sharei Omru Gedola Hachnasas Orchim. I don't know. But I think what he's trying to drive at, again, I'm pushing this a little bit, that maybe he means that since the Gemara says Gedol Hachnasas Orchim, then when you're involved in a mitzvah of, preparing the Parsha and preparing the Sefer Torah, then that doesn't shine a candle to Hachnasas Orchim. Anyway, he says and this is the last line here. He says, "Ach mikol makom lamadu midvarav shehotzi mimasha omer gdola hachnasas orchim yosem hakodesh beis hamikdash chen hachnasas orchim docha mitzvahs Talmud Torah." That's not so. That's not what the Aderes is saying. The Aderes was just saying that there was something in the nature of Talmud Torah that would have to give way to hachnasas orchim. But at the end of the day, Torah and Hachnasas Orchim are going to be, governed and ruled by this rule. And that is that if it could be done al yidei acher, then you have to stop. Then you don't have to. You continue learning. If it cannot be done al yidei acher, then you have to stop your learning in order to fulfill the mitzvah. Okay, then. So this is where we'll stop for today, and I wish you a great week. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Thank you.